Hello and welcome to the pod. I'm Nathan Fink.
I'm Jolyn Drennan, and this is New Hampshire Family Now,
a show about building family in the Granite State. Today on the podcast, Children's Trust Data Manager Becky Berk joins me to discuss family support data collection and why my wife's cell phone went missing. And later, Director of the Division for Children, Youth, and Families, Joe Ribsam, talks systems transformation and the many ways we can all build a safe, stable, and supportive New Hampshire. New Hampshire Family Now is brought to you by the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation. Since 1962, the Charitable Foundation has worked hand in hand with generous and visionary citizens to maximize the power of giving and support, collaborate, and lead innovative initiatives. Initiatives like New Hampshire Tomorrow, which is focused on making sure children and families have access to education, healthcare, and career pathways to ensure every family member thrives. To learn more about New Hampshire Charitable Foundation and all their initiatives, go to www.nhcf.org. This podcast was also brought to you by Family Support New Hampshire. Family Support New Hampshire is NH's coalition of family resource centers and family strengthening programs that exist to ensure Granite State families have access to resources so both caregivers and children can succeed, because supported families are strong families. To find a family resource center near you, visit www.fsnh.org. Hey, it's Nathan, co-host of New Hampshire Family Now. I wanted to take a quick break from the show because it occurred to me the other day that I've never asked you to subscribe to this podcast. Subscribing is free, and when you do it, it helps our placement algorithms, making it that much easier for caregivers across New Hampshire to find valuable information and strategies for their families. Also, you'll be alerted when a new episode drops. And if you like the show, leaving a review helps us that much more. So go to wherever you get your podcast, type in New Hampshire Family Now, and as the kids say, smash that subscribe button. I say click it, because if you smash it, then you're going to need a new one. Thank you and enjoy today's podcast. Hello and welcome to the podcast. Joining me today is one of my personal heroes, Children's Trust Data Manager Becky Berk, and I did hear a laugh in that intro. Why the laugh?
Well, just because colleagues are always giving each other a hard time, and the culture here is just so collaborative, but also we give each other grief.
This is your second time on the podcast or third time?
I don't even know. I think second.
That's actually a relief, because the third time you get an embroidered jacket. Last time you were here, we talked a lot about the Family Support Data System, or FSDS, as the first ever data platform available universally to all family resource centers across the state. So we are nearly a year away from that, the release. What successes and challenges can you share with us?
So we're actually closer to 2 years from the launch of the FSDS at this point. And this is a big deal because it's the first time ever that the family resource centers have all had the same platform to use. And so since the launch, statewide, they've logged 23,000 encounters with 15,600 people in 6,000 families. So that has been wonderful. The reporting aspect has been huge with the FSDS because agencies can run their own reports, but also we can take some of the burden off of them to do statewide reporting on their behalf, which again is kind of a big deal because we want to free them up as much as we can to do the work that they're best qualified and most passionate about doing, which is working directly with families. That's a huge success in my view. The challenge, I think, continues to be that there are multiple data systems. If we could wave a magic wand and go back in time and start family resource centers all together with this kind of family support data system already in place, we would be in a much better position now. But because they didn't have that for so long, there are many other data systems that they have started or that the state or funders have required them to use. That's probably the most significant challenge that remains for us.
Now, is it true then, because we've got kind of a disparate nature to even the investment or the accruing of multiple data systems, that then limits the picture that emerges?
Well, yes, because essentially what you end up with is a fractured data reporting system. So the FSDS reports a lot of data that is across all FRCs. And for us to be able to really represent the bigger picture, we need to be able to pull from the family resource centers if they've developed their own internal proprietary system. To really get the full picture, we need to take that kaleidoscope of all these different pieces of data and be able to pull it together. I have not talked with anyone yet who said, I really have gone into the family support field because I love entering data. If we can continue to build toward a system where staff have to enter data once and only once into a system and not enter it here, and then, have to double enter it here, and then, by the way, you have to triple enter it here, right? So this is always a conversation that I raise is data integration is wonderful. And if it works well, it means that people are double entering data far less often.
Right. And you can see what happens to resources because resources are scarce, double entry, triple entry. Well, regardless of the disparate nature of it, some trends must be emerging. What are you seeing?
It's so gratifying to look at the data in terms of the services that families are receiving, because remember that family resource centers serve all families. And from a child abuse prevention standpoint, the farther upstream that we can work with families, the better. So when we look at the focus of the areas that families are being supported in, they fall into many of what is commonly called the social determinants of health, those basic background provisional pieces that reduce a family's stress level and that can really allow parents to focus on parenting without worrying about housing, without worrying about where their next meal is going to come from. A lot of the work that we're all engaged in is trying to be sure that families are healthy and well supported from the get-go, way upstream.
So what I'm hearing from you is, well, one, there's a lot of excitement in your voice when you talk about this, which means to my mind, there's a lot of promise and possibility regarding this data system and what it can help us do going forward. I think that's the basis of my question is what can we do to capitalize on that promise and possibility and make for a system going forward that really speaks to the needs that and the gaps that we need to fill?
So again, primary prevention, family resource centers serve all families. So to the extent that we can get the data with respect to all the services with all the families that they're supporting as much as possible into a common platform, that is a huge challenge. And the flip side of every challenge is an opportunity. So I think that we do have a real opportunity to do that here. I think when I look back over the past couple of years, we have been able essentially to work with the state and with state agencies as they're developing new programs that they want to roll out through the family resource centers. We've been able to work with them to essentially code into the family support data system the data elements that they need, thereby preventing the proliferation of yet another series of data systems. The aspect about prevention is so key because when you look at all the different services that family resource centers are offering, every parent, every family needs some kind of support at some point, even if it's to get some tips or some tricks. So whether it's parenting classes or whether it's a drop-in, geez, can you just direct me to the right place? Or whether it's a more intensive series of visits through home visits. It's all available through the family resource centers. And the more that we can tell that story and how important the family resource centers are to everything that families need across the state, I think the better off we all are.
Yeah. Go through and experience everything that happens in that family unit, no matter what it looks like. Now, what are some of the conclusions that we can draw based on the numbers that are coming out of it? Yeah,
really interesting question. And so when we look at the information around the needs that a family presents at whatever level it is, right? I just need some help with this small thing, or, I really need some more extended help. When you look at the needs that families are presenting, and then you look at the services that are being provided, there's a great match there. So families are coming in with needs and family resource centers are able to fill those needs. And if they can't fill them directly with their own staffing and their own programming, they're connecting them with other community resources who can. That to me is a huge affirmation, again, of all the work that the family resource centers are doing, not only to provide supports to families, but to understand them.
Now, this is a section in the podcast that I have come to label messing with Becky. Do you want to play?
Hey, playing with fire, but go ahead.
So I'm going to give you a partial picture of a scene from my life in the form of sensory details. Your job is to draw conclusions about what's going on here. You ready?
Sure.
All right, here's scene 1. You hear a door slam. Shortly thereafter, the doorknob rattles like crazy. And then you hear a child's voice singing, "Okay, bye." What's going on here?
So I think one of two things. There's definitely some separation going on there between the parent and the child. The main essential question is who left whom? Did the parent leave the child or did the child leave the parent? And who by mistake, or maybe not by mistake, locked a door?
I'm using the bathroom and I've asked my son for a little privacy. All right, you ready for scene 2?
Sure.
You see an explosion of clothes on the bed. Pillows and cushions around the house are lying everywhere. And then there is the sound of urgent footfall. What's happening?
I would say that potentially mom or dad might have said to a child how important it is to keep your room tidy and to pick up after yourself and to put your clothes away. And said child has just heard the car pull into the driveway and the car door slam. And so the footfalls are the frantic realization by the child that they have a tall task to complete in short order.
Wow, that's very detailed. And yet it was just my wife because she still can't find her cell phone. Last one. So you hear running water and teeth being brushed, 2 sets of pleases and thank yous, and then a pull chain, lights switching off, and then nothing.
I would say that is 2 exhausted caregivers going to bed.
Why are you so good at this? For real, though, some of these conclusions, and we're drawing some conclusions from partial scenes, right? And I think what's interesting is, I did this in jest, but you're really reading into this. Which one, to your mind, jumps out for further investigation?
So I think I would say the clothes strewn everywhere and the footfalls. And so I theorized based on that data, that anecdotal data, what the situation was. So part of assuming that I'm correct, because I don't know otherwise at this point, part of my essential questions might be, I wonder what patterns or trends there might be in this issue. And is it a repeated pattern? And if it's a repeated pattern, has anything been done about it? And if so, what? And if something was done, was it successful or not? And if it wasn't successful, what might that suggest about a different approach? So whenever I look at data, I know that it's only telling part of the story, not the whole story. And there's always a curiosity. What do we think we know from this? And are there ways to extrapolate, to triangulate the data to see how correct we are? And then what do we do about it based on what we know about the data? And is there a trend, a problem that we need to solve? So for me, part of the fascinating thing about data is that you can use it at the microscopic level to solve a problem for an individual or for a family, right? And you can look at it at the macroscopic level, but the process is very much the same in terms of continuous quality improvement. Whether you're a family, whether you're a state agency, whether you're a funder, what's going well? What's the data to prove it? What do we think we know? And where do we think the problems are? And what are we going to do about it?
Becky Berk, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for the opportunity, as always.
And when we come back, I interview Joe Ribsam, Director for the Division of Children, Youth, and Families. Don't go anywhere.
Many thanks to New Hampshire's Office of Social and Emotional Wellness for sponsoring this podcast. Started within New Hampshire's Department of Education, the Office of Social and Emotional Wellness consolidates policy development and implements projects and programs that are focused on health and wellness with an emphasis on behavioral health of all students, youth, and families. To learn more about the Department of Education and its many programs and approaches, visit www.education.nh.gov. Today's show was also brought to you by Merrimack County Savings Bank, who proudly supports the mission and efforts of New Hampshire Children's Trust. Founded in 1867, Merrimack has served people, businesses, nonprofits, and municipalities in central and southern New Hampshire for over 155 years by treating everyone with care, respect, and compassion. Visit your local offices in Bow, Concord, Kentucky, Hooksett, and Nashua, or go to www.themerrimack.com. New Hampshire Children's Trust is excited to announce the launch of the 2022 I Am Prevention campaign. Throughout April, the Trust and its many family supporting partners are celebrating the many ways to strengthen families and help caregivers provide safe and nurturing environments for children. Connect with us for a list of trainings, webinars, panel discussions, and more, all designed to build family and community resilience in which children can thrive. Visit www.nhchildrenstrust.org to be prevention today. Hello and welcome to the podcast. Today on the show, I'm incredibly excited to welcome Joe Ribsam, Director of New Hampshire's Division for Children, Youth, and Families, also known as DCYF. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Nathan. Thanks so much for having me, and so grateful to be part of this podcast. I'm so happy to listen to these for the past, I guess this is about a year now that you guys have been doing this.
We're in season 2, and that is as good as a plug as I've ever heard. So thank you. So Joe, I've had the pleasure of working parallel you in the division for a few years now. So I am familiar, but those who are not, what is the Division for Children, Youth, and Families, and how does it work to accomplish its mission?
Sure. So DCYF, the Division for Children, Youth, and Families in New Hampshire, really is focused in 2 areas. That's child protection and juvenile justice. And I think a lot of folks think about the mission of DCYF as being a lot broader than that. And certainly we have a role to play in all sorts of other things. But at the end of the day, the fundamental mission of DCYF is really those 2 deep-end issues around child protection and juvenile justice. And I say that not to step away from other responsibilities, but really to help people get clear about when's the right time for DCYF to be involved and when's the right time for other folks to be involved in helping strengthen families and support kids. Really not included in the role of DCYF is all those great things that we should be doing for kids and families that are not yet a crisis, that don't directly impact safety. And I think that's one of the real big tricks that we have to wrestle with as we continue to move forward with our system is recognizing when is safety of a child implicated, when is safety of a community implicated, and that those are the places where DCYF steps in. And where is it short of that, but you have families who need help, you have youth who need help, you have kids who need assistance. And how do we make sure that we get those families, those youth, those children to those right resources outside of DCYF so that we, the crisis system, never have to get involved at all?
Now, I've heard for a while now about the transformation of New Hampshire's system of support, which suggests moving away from a certain model or ways of thinking and toward another. With regards to DCYF, where were we and where would we like to go?
You know, just a few years ago, we were at a place at DCYF where we literally could not even help a family without going to court and getting a court order, which is really a bizarre way to go about trying to work with families and help families, because that's obviously a scary experience, right? So a lot of work's been done in that space, but really that's just one piece of kind of this big overall shift that we're trying to do. And I try to think about it simply in 2 big areas that we need to be focused on. Number 1, we need to get in early to support kids, families, youth, make sure that we can identify their needs, identify their strengths, and build those strengths and meet those needs. And oftentimes, like I said just a moment ago, that is not DCYF driving that. That's somebody else driving that. But we have a role to play even in those instances in helping identify those families, right? We get calls to our hotline all the time. We do assessments, and sometimes families, it's not abuse or neglect, but we identify families with needs. So we have a role to play there to make sure that if we identify a family with needs, that we're giving them to the right resources so that they don't come back to us again. The other big piece of it is making sure that when we do have families that do need to come into the deep end system, that we have high quality services to meet those needs. There's a lot of big things in that bucket, but one of them that we've heard a lot about in the last few years, and that I'm glad to say we're doing better at, even though we haven't quite achieved our goals, is making sure that we have appropriate staffing so that families actually have time to engage with their caseworker, and caseworkers actually have the time to spend with families to, again, get back to that idea of understanding their needs and helping them meet their needs, understanding their strengths and helping them build their strengths. Other big piece of that too are looking at our service system, right? Having evidence-based models, which historically we haven't had here in New Hampshire. Now we're in the process of building out, having, appropriate foster care and having a robust use of relatives and kin to help support kids and families when they do come to the attention of the deep end system. So really around those 2 big things, getting families help early, and if we do need to get involved, making sure that we have high quality interventions.
It feels like, using that pool metaphor like that, how they have those 0 entry pools, which I have kids, and it's so great because it's like, you're walking in from no water into water. And what I'm hearing you say is really an acknowledgement of the shallow end of the pool and just how critical it is.
for families, and then building that association with like, look, this is a pool. There's all sorts of depths of water in this pool, and there are some depths of water that are safer, and there's some depths of water that build for stronger swimmers.
Yeah, and I've not heard that exact metaphor, but I like it. You're quite good at that, Nathan. But I think it's great, and I think that's right, is figuring out, again, getting back to this idea, all families have needs, and trying to get families to that place where they can more easily meet their needs, right? And once they're underwater in your metaphor, then that's too far, and we need to help pull them back.
Yeah. So along those lines, then, what are some of the specific initiatives, programs, projects that may help us get to where we want to go?
So there is so much that we've been up to in the past 4 or 5 years. And a lot of this isn't actually directly DCYF initiatives, but rather initiatives that DCYF has been partnering with other state entities and other community partners to build out. Again, because if we remember what we said earlier about DCYF being at the crisis end, and where we really need to be working with families as well before that point, DCYF shouldn't be the one driving that. We need to have communities driving that and other partners driving that. But we're always a partner in that, and have been vigorous advocates to try to build those things out. And where we can help drive dollars towards that, help drive dollars towards that. So one of the biggest, huge changes in this state is the building of what's being called the Children's System of Care. And really what that is, it's a system of care for behavioral health needs for kids. Believe it or not, in New Hampshire, if you looked at the 10-year mental health plan that was done 10 years ago, the word child never appears once, as if kids don't have behavioral health needs, which of course is ludicrous. And what happened in that environment was DCYF ended up becoming the de facto behavioral health system for kids, which is just not a good way to work with families, right? If the only way that you can get the help that your child needs, mental health services that your child needs, which should be no different than medical services in my view, if the only way to get that help is to come to DCYF through the door of abuse or neglect or through the door of juvenile delinquency, then care is going to get deferred. Parents aren't going to get the help they need. Kids aren't going to get the help they need. And we're going to wait until it's way too late to help them out. So building this new children's system of care has been absolutely critical. And in the long run, it'll help drive down the number of kids in the DCYF system. And the key components there, which now are all under contract and just emerging, are huge, right? So we now have what's called a rapid response system where any parent can call if they believe their child's having a mental health crisis and have a clinician and a peer support come out to the home or wherever that child is, if it's school, wherever it is, and work with that child to de-escalate the situation and try to help keep that child safe at home. We have high fidelity wraparound supports now for kids who have moderate behavioral health needs, where you have moderate to high behavioral health needs, where you have clinical folks pulling together teams of parents, of the youth themselves, of schools, of anybody that's important in that kid's life, including clinicians and treatment providers, and helping them identify, what supports and services and processes are best to help keep that kid safe and at home in their own community. And if a kid does end up out of home, ends up in residential care, foster care, that team can keep working with them to help get them back to the community again, which is huge. And there's more to that, and I'll move on because we could talk for a whole hour about that. Other big things, though, is in the last few years, we've been partnering with our Division of Economic and Housing Stability and our Division for Public Health Services to build out extra supports for family resource centers with the help of the Children's Trust, which has been huge. And I think is probably a place where we need to look even deeper and look to build out even more support as this process continues, and around the development of brand new kinship navigation programs in the state. So we hear so much about, particularly in the wake of the opioid crisis, grandparents, sometimes aunts and uncles, sometimes neighbors or members of a faith community, sometimes it's a coach, but somebody else stepping up to help care for a child when a parent is going through some type of crisis, oftentimes related to substance use or untreated mental health. And how do we support those people to make sure that they're able to meet those kids' needs? Those are all new things, or that particularly Kinship Navigator is a new thing we have here in the state, and a great support to kids and parents. And then the last one I'll mention, and there's even more, but is the initiation of a model that we call community-based voluntary services. So that's actually for when DCYF does a child protection assessment and we identify that there's not abuse or neglect happening in this house, but this is a family that's at high risk of coming back to our attention because of some unmet needs or some challenges there. Oftentimes it's related to substance use. Sometimes it might be related to untreated mental health. Oftentimes it's related to poverty and other economic concerns, which really are not abuse or neglect. Those are families that need help. What community-based voluntary services does is it lets us close out our child protection case and have a community-based provider. In the North Country, it's a family resource center up at Gorham, and they have satellites all over the place, and they're awesome. In most of the state, it's Waypoint, who is serving 90% of the state and is doing an awesome job. But you then have a community-based basically social worker going out, working with these families to identify their needs, meet their needs, build their parental strengths, and make sure that they don't have to come back to the attention of the defense system. So all of these ways of trying to identify when families have needs that need to be met and figuring out how to do that without forcing them into the court system.
As you're saying this, I had this aha moment because, you started mentioning the protective factors and parenting, knowledge of parenting and parenting strengths. And I kept thinking about my resilience quotient is so much higher than my children's because I've had to develop those buffers or those strategies my entire life. So of course we would need to focus on the child. Of course we would need to focus on the behavioral and mental health needs because they don't have that shot at experience and strategy like I had over the course of 40 years. And I do know also that you've done this work before in the state of New Jersey. How does that work you did there inform the work you're doing here, and where does it diverge?
That's a great question. I've been here in New Hampshire for about 4.5 years now. Before that, I spent just under 10 years working in New Jersey's Department of Children and Families. And some of the work we're doing here is very similar. In some places, we're going on a slightly different path. Philosophically, I think it's all very well aligned, but when you try to implement things, they look different, right? So one example where things are quite similar is the emergence of that children's system of care that I spoke about before. That's actually a comparable model to what we did in New Jersey. In New Jersey, it was run through a bunch of smaller, groupings of counties. Here, where we're a smaller state, we're able to kind of manage it more statewide and have just a couple of those care management entities. But a lot of that, at least the core components of that system, are very similar to what we did down there, and which was incredibly successful. Drove down utilization of child protection, utilization of juvenile justice, utilization of kids in out-of-home residential care, and all that was coming through the early identification of kids' behavioral health needs and meeting those needs in the community. Another program, though, where I think we've diverged quite a bit, philosophically the same, but totally different model, is I spoke earlier about community-based voluntary services. In New Jersey, we had a pathway within our child protection system called a child welfare services case. That was different than a child protection case. Basically, what that meant was there's not abuse and neglect here, but we're going to open up to provide supports to the family and have a state caseworker working with that family. In a lot of ways, that's what CBVS, Community-Based Voluntary Services, strives to do. But the key distinction is instead of having a child protection worker doing that work, you have a community-based agency doing that work. And it's actually one of the places where I actually like our structure better. And the reason for that is that, understandably, lots of families are afraid of the child protection system. I wish it wasn't true, but it's understandable, right? We have a lot of authority as a state agency. We have the authority to remove children. We do have to go to court. But with that, naturally, lots of families are going to be fearful and they're going to be skeptical. And if we're able to find a way to make sure that those families are having their needs met, but having them met by folks who are really in the community and really part of their regular everyday environment, I think we're going to have better success in getting those families to willingly engage and to be honest and forthright and really dig in deep to understand the problems that they're having and meet those problems. So really one of the big key differences in the child protection space is in that area where we don't yet have abuse and neglect, but we know we have high risk and we know we have high need. And where do we meet that need? And the way that we've developed this here by using our community providers, I think is really an advantage structurally to how we do this work. And that I hope is going to show, it's really going to pay off in the long run.
Now, it's interesting, though, because you just mentioned that DCYF does have a lot of authority. And, when we approach this challenge that is strengthening the family unit, whether it's having to remove a child, having to refer a family, having to reunify a child with their caregiver, parent or caregiver, these are more than numbers or statistics. These are actually real people. And I think in my mind, we get those conflated because these are also real children. These are real New Hampshire families and children. And I also know that DCYF will soon be introducing a series of videos with staff and families who have worked with the division over the years. And I'd like to play a brief section to get your reaction to it.
I get a call from DCYF telling me that the girls, my grandchildren, were being taken into custody. And I said, absolutely, bring them to my house then. I didn't want them separated or anything. Going against my daughter was not something that I looked forward to doing, but I had to think of the safety of the children, and that was my first priority this whole time. they brought them to my house, and DCYF came in and they kind of did an inspection of everything and did kind of like an interview with me to make sure that they felt that it was a safe place for them. And they worked with my daughter to try to reunify her with the girls. And due to mental health issues, that just wasn't working. So that's how I ended up eventually adopting. It truly takes a village.
What is your reaction to what we're hearing?
It's a couple things. One, how real this is for families. These are real people. These are real kids, a real mother of her own child and grandmother of these children, and how tough it is for somebody in that situation to struggle between the relationship they have with their own child, their responsibilities for their grandchildren. How do we make all that work? And it's amazing, how many families are ready, willing, and able to step up when they need to and when we give them that chance. And it's one of those places where I think it's a real priority for us in the coming years to do better. We probably about a third of our kids are currently with relative caregivers when they enter out-of-home care, but we could do a lot better than that. The best in the country, Allegheny County, they get close to 80% of their kids with relatives and kin. And we think about kin more broadly than just relatives. Think about all the people who are important in a young person's life and who could be the right person to help them out. And that's really key to minimize trauma for kids, but also oftentimes key to make sure that when kids do reunify with their families, that the family has a support network built into place who understands, the things that have transpired, understands the warning signs if things need more support going forward. And you end up, when you're using relatives and kin in this way, with, I think, more stable reunification plans even. So in that instance, we heard reunification wasn't possible. Sometimes that's the case, and wonderful that we have relatives and kin willing to step up there. But when it is possible, which is oftentimes the case, then those relatives and kin can still be there to create a team around that family to support that family in the long run going forward. And it's so important.
Now, April Child Abuse Prevention Month is right around the corner, and we are really talking a lot about making for more supportive communities, making for stronger families, and in doing those things, making for safer children. And, we kind of use that metaphor of the pool, and we've got different ends of it, different entry points. So I'm wondering, when you think to yourself about prevention and what this looks like, not on the systems level, but in the living room, to your mind, what is it we're talking about?
Yeah, we spent a lot of time already talking about the systems piece of it, right? The way that we're trying to deliberately create pathways away from the more coercive aspects of the system towards the more supportive aspect of the system. But where I think we see the most change, the most promise, is actually in the communities themselves and the families themselves. The idea that all of us should know the kids and families in their neighborhoods. We should know their names. We should talk to them. We should ask them how they're doing. We should play games with them. We should have them over for barbecues or whatever else it is that you like to do. And that's huge, right? I think moving into a space where communities actually know one another again, where neighborhoods know one another again, is huge. And COVID maybe in some ways made that harder. Maybe in some ways made it easier because people were home. But it's so important. And I think that's really where it starts, right? It really gets back to what's happening in your family. Are you looking out for the people that you grew up with, right? Your siblings and their kids, your cousins and their kids? What's happening in your neighborhood? Do you know the kids that live in your neighborhood? Are you supportive of those families? And you got to be there in the good times and having fun with them. And then if things go south, if they have a hard time, they're going to be comfortable coming to you for help. And then you're going to be able to be there to help them out when things are tough. And there's a lot of fun in that, right? There's a lot of fun, not necessarily when things are tough, but in the times when things aren't so tough. It's wonderful to be part of that type of community. And I think that's something that we need to see more of. And when we get back to that space where communities really do know one another, where neighbors really know one another and care about one another, we'll see a lot more progress in reducing the number of calls to the hotline, which at the end of the day is what I want. I don't want to get any more calls. I want the phone to go dead. And I think communities have the power to, in most instances, make that happen.
Joe, it It has been a pleasure talking about this. I know it's a difficult subject, but it is amazing to talk about solution and, where we can go with this. So please come back when you get a chance.
Absolutely. I'll be happy to. Thank you so much, Nathan. Thank you so much to the Children's Trust. So much great work happening there. So grateful for the partnership.
Many thanks to the Samuel P. Hunt Foundation for sponsoring this podcast. Established in 1951, Samuel P. Hunt Foundation is a Manchester-based, independent nonprofit that provides grants primarily for the arts, children and youth services, faith-based organizations, educational institutions, healthcare, and human services. New Hampshire Family Now is listed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and more. Listen wherever you get your podcasts or ask your smart speaker to play New Hampshire Family Now.